The sun bled into the earth like a wound refusing to close, dragging streaks of fire across the endless sky. It was the kind of sunset that didn't warm but warned, red enough to make even the crows silent, even the wind still. The prairie was too quiet. Where there should have been voices, there was only the crackle of dying flames and the low groan of a broken wagon wheel spinning idly in the wind. A field of shattered wood and scorched linen lay scattered like bones across the flatlands. Wagons had once stood proud here, white canvas domes like sails on a hopeful voyage. Now they were nothing but ghosts, charred, splintered, still smoking. Horses lay crumpled where they'd fallen, some torn open, others collapsed in poses of panic. Blood had dried into the dirt, hard as rust. And amid it all, the wind stirred something soft and strange. A scrap of lace, a child's doll missing an eye, a silver fork reflecting the last light of the sun. From beneath the broken ribs of a wagon, something moved. A hand, pale, shaking, streaked with soot, clawed its way into view. Then an arm, trembling, followed by a face half covered in dried blood and ash. She dragged herself into the dying light like someone reborn from the belly of a terrible beast. Every motion seemed to cost her. Her name was Evelyn. Once, she had been Lady Evelyn Duval of Sussex, the youngest daughter of a baron and wife to a man whose love had been colder than stone. But out here, there were no titles, only pain and sky and survival. Her dress, fine once, hung in strips around her knees, torn and blackened. Her blonde hair was tangled with twigs and ash. Her lips were cracked, and her breath rattled from a chest bruised from where she'd thrown herself under the wagon when the bullets came. She sat upright with great effort, blinking toward the horizon. There was nothing. No cavalry, no rescuers. Just a vast and terrible silence. Then hooves. She froze. A low, rhythmic beat approached from the north, slow, deliberate. Not a charge. A single rider. He emerged over the hill with the sunset behind him, his silhouette cut from copper. Bare-chested beneath a deerskin cloak, a braid of dark hair fell across one shoulder, and red paint streaked his cheekbones like war-cry tears. He rode without fear or flourish, as if he and the horse were born together. He carried no rifle, only a bow strapped to his back and the weight of someone who had seen too much. He slowed as he neared the ruins of the wagon train, his horse stepping carefully around the dead. He scanned the bodies, not with horror, but with reverence, like a priest walking through a ruined temple. Then he saw her. She tried to stand, failed. Her legs folded like broken paper. Her hands clutched a piece of wood, half a wagon spoke, not as a weapon, but as instinct. She didn't cry out, didn't beg, only lifted her chin, defiant and trembling. He stopped 3 paces away. His eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers. Neither moved. Then he reached into a leather pouch and withdrew a flask. He crouched, slowly, offering it to her like one would offer food to a starving animal. Not close enough to touch, just enough to choose. She took it, drank, coughed, drank again, and still he said nothing. When she lowered the flask, her voice cracked out like wind through dry grass. "Are you Lakota?" He studied her a moment, then nodded once. "Are you going to kill me?" A beat. Another. He shook his head. One slow, grave motion. She wanted to weep, but didn't have the strength. Instead, she asked, "What's your name?" The words that came back were soft, shaped like water, flowing over stone. Wiaka Luda. Red feather. She tried to repeat it. Failed. He didn't correct her. Instead, he walked past her, examining the wreckage. He didn't touch the dead, but bowed his head at each body. For a long time, he said nothing. When he returned, he carried long branches and leather straps. Without a word, he began building a travois, 2 poles tied together with animal hide, meant to drag a body behind a horse. She watched him work, every motion steady and purposeful. He didn't look at her while he worked, yet somehow he saw her. When the travois was done, he knelt beside her again. Gently, he offered his arm. She hesitated. Then she reached for him, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. She expected pain. She expected the scream in her hip and ribs. But she didn't expect the way he held her, not like something fragile, but something sacred. He tied her carefully to the travois, ensuring her limbs wouldn't jolt or bruise further. She looked up at him, breath shallow, eyelids heavy. "Why are you helping me?" He looked to the west, where the fire of the sky had cooled into purples and deep indigo. "You were breathing," he said, voice low and rough. She didn't understand then, but later, those words would be the first she remembered falling in love with. As they moved across the plains, she lay against rough hide, watching the stars blink into life. She thought of her father, cold and distant. Her husband, colder still. A life of tea sets and tight corsets, of words said with knives behind them. And here was a man who said almost nothing, but in every silence there was mercy. Hours passed. Night fell. The moon rose full and indifferent. Coyotes howled from a distant ridge, but none came near. Weaka rode with eyes on the horizon, the reins loose in his hand. She watched the rhythm of his back, the line of his spine, and slowly, the fear inside her softened into something else, something strange and aching. When they stopped at last beneath the shelter of a rock overhang, he built a small fire with dry prairie grass and flint. She was shivering. Without asking, he placed his buffalo robe around her shoulders. She buried her face into its musk and warmth and closed her eyes. He sat beside the flames and looked to the stars. Then he spoke, not to her, but to the night. His words were Lakota, melodic and low, like lullabies to ancestors. She didn't understand the meaning, but she understood the weight. He sang softly, alone, his voice like the wind through pine needles. And Evelyn, Baroness of Nothing, closed her eyes with tears drying on her cheeks, warmed by a fire she hadn't lit, guarded by a man she didn't know. But in that moment, for the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt safe. And somewhere in the tall grass, the spirits listened. Dawn spilled gently across the prairie, not with grandeur, but with the hush of a secret being told. Pale gold light kissed the horizon, sweeping over open fields and brushing the faces of sleeping deer, silent owls returning to hollow trees. The wind stirred softly, as if it, too, were waking from a long dream. Evelyn opened her eyes to that kind of morning, clean, quiet, filled with the scent of earth and distant smoke. Her body ached, wrapped tight in the buffalo robe, but her breath came easy now. The fire from the night before had burned to coals. A new one crackled beside it, and Weaka was there, crouched with a stone in his hand, grinding herbs against a slab of slate. He hadn't spoken much during the night, not even when she whimpered in her sleep, not when she shifted with pain. But he hadn't left either. That, she realized, mattered more. The journey began again in silence. He lifted her gently onto the travois, tying her in with the same care he had used before. His horse moved at a steady pace, unbothered by the added weight, its hooves muffled by the prairie grass still wet with dew. By midday, they came upon a bend in the land, where cottonwood trees gathered around a stream that sang over smooth stones. And nestled beside it, hidden as if it had grown from the earth itself, was a small Lakota encampment. 6 teepees arranged like petals around a central fire, smoke curling skyward in lazy strands. Children ran first. Their bare feet thudded softly against the ground as they darted toward the arriving rider, squealing with recognition. Behind them, women emerged, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as they saw Evelyn's form tied to the travois. One woman stepped forward, her braids streaked with gray, her eyes sharp with understanding. She exchanged no words with Weaka, only a nod, before kneeling beside Evelyn. Her hands were warm and skilled. She untied Evelyn with firm but gentle fingers, examined the bruises, the scrapes, the wound on her side. When Evelyn winced, the woman touched her cheek with surprising tenderness and murmured something in Lakota, soft, steady, like the hush of wind through willows. They helped her into one of the teepees, cool and dark inside, fragrant with herbs hanging from tied bundles. She was laid on a bed of furs, covered in a woven blanket, a bowl of something warm pressed into her hands. Evelyn didn't understand the words, but she understood the care. Later, when the pain dulled and her eyes could stay open longer than a breath, she watched Wiaka outside, sitting by the fire. He said little, ate little, but stayed near. Always near. She asked, when he finally came in that night, "Who is she, the woman who helped me?" He hesitated, then answered with quiet pride, "My sister, Hopia." Hopia. The name felt like an ember in her mouth, warm, persistent. She would remember it. In the days that followed, Evelyn grew stronger. She learned the names of the children, learned which berries were sweet and which to avoid. Hopia showed her how to grind corn with stone, how to boil herbs into healing teas, how to braid rope from reeds. Evelyn's hands fumbled at first, soft from a life of silks and letter writing. But she tried. And every time she did, the villagers watched her a little less with suspicion and a little more with curiosity. No one called her Baroness. Here, she was only Evelyn. One morning, Wiaka brought her something wrapped in buckskin. Inside lay a small wooden flute, hand-carved, smoothed by touch and time. Its surface was etched with simple lines and circles, symbols she didn't recognize. "For me?" she asked, her voice low with disbelief. He nodded. "To call back your voice." She didn't play it for 3 days. Then, one afternoon by the stream, with no one listening but the wind and the dragonflies, she pressed it to her lips. The tune she played was broken, halting, a lullaby her mother once hummed, back when her world was simpler. The notes spilled like water, slipping from a cracked cup, imperfect but sincere. When she looked up, she saw 2 village girls watching her from the trees, eyes wide, unmoving. She smiled. They stepped closer. By nightfall, she was teaching them how to mimic the notes. In that moment, something shifted. Not just in the children. In Evelyn. She no longer felt like a visitor. She was not healed. But she had stopped retreating from herself. Wiaka noticed. He did not praise her, did not touch her hand or smile too long. But his gaze lingered sometimes, when she laughed with Hopia, or when she sat by the fire weaving reeds with focus and furrowed brow. And Evelyn noticed him too, not in the way she had noticed men before, not with admiration or polite flirtation. No, this noticing was quieter, heavier, rooted in something bone deep. She noticed the way he crouched to help the elders, without being asked. The way he sat with a grieving widow for hours, saying nothing, offering only his presence. The way his hands, calloused from hunting and hardship, still moved with the patience of a sculptor. He did not try to fix her. He simply made room. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised lavender and gold, they sat beside the river. The children had gone quiet. The campfire crackled low behind them. She turned to him and said, "I don't think I remember who I used to be." Wiaka looked at her for a long while. "Then maybe it is time," he said, "to become someone new." The words didn't fall like revelation. They landed gently, like seeds. She held them in her chest, wondering what might grow from them. That night, she dreamed not of fire or running, but of hands dipping into river water, of flute music echoing over hills, of a house made not of stone, but of fabric and smoke and story. When she woke, she wasn't sure if the dream belonged to her or to him. On the 7th morning, a trader arrived on horseback. His wagon was small but well-stocked, beads, blankets, canned fruit from the east. He wore a dusty coat and a hat pulled low, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the village like a man taking inventory. Evelyn was helping Hopia with the drying herbs when the trader's gaze landed on her. He froze. Then a slow, cruel grin spread across his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Lady Evelyn Duval. Thought you drowned crossing the Missouri." The name struck like a whip. Everyone looked. The air went still. Wiaka stepped forward from the fire. His body tensed, but his face remained unreadable. Evelyn stood slowly. Her legs were steady now. Her hands did not shake. "I'm not her anymore," she said, voice low but clear. The trader laughed. "That's rich. The Baroness of Sussex hiding out in a heathen village. Wonder how much your husband would pay to drag you back." "I'm not going back," she said. Wiaka said nothing, but he stepped between them. The message was understood. The trader shrugged, spit in the dirt, and turned back to his wagon. But the spell had broken. She sat alone that night by the river, hands clenched tight in her lap, the flute untouched beside her. Her name, her real name, felt foreign now, heavy, like something she'd shed and someone had tried to sew back onto her skin. Wiaka joined her. Not close, just near enough to be felt. He did not ask what she was thinking. She said anyway, it wasn't a lie. I didn't want to be seen as a title. I wanted to be a person. You are, he said, simply, quietly. The moon rose between them. She looked at him, not with yearning, not yet, but with recognition. Here, in this space between firelight and moonlight, between two names and two pasts, something was growing. Not fast, not loud, but real. And just beneath her ribs, Evelyn felt it bloom. The wind had changed. It moved differently now, no longer warm and sweet, but with a brittle edge, as though some unseen shift in the world had gone unnoticed by all but the air. The trees at the edge of the camp creaked in protest. Birds flew low. Dogs didn't bark. They watched. Evelyn sat outside Hopia's teepee, her back to the fire, her hands wrapped around a folded piece of paper stained with ash. She had written it at dawn, when the village still slept and the stars hadn't yet surrendered to the sun. Ink from a crushed berry, lines careful and slow. The letter was to her brother, somewhere in England or perhaps Italy by now. She would never send it. It read of the massacre, of Wiaka, of waking into a life that didn't ask for a title before it gave her water. It read of silence and safety, and how one could become more than what they escaped. But the letter remained hidden in her cloak, beside the flute, beside the name she no longer used. Wiaka passed by her without speaking. He was headed toward the edge of the trees, where his traps lay. Their eyes met only for a second, his unreadable, hers quietly searching, but the space between them felt heavier than before. Since the traitor had named her aloud, something had fractured. Not loudly, not in anger, but in subtle ways. Wiaka had begun to rise before the sun, returning only as night fell. She had stopped speaking her thoughts aloud, returning instead to the quiet etiquette of her old life, where truth was only shared in glances and footnotes. She didn't blame him. Not really. She had withheld something essential. And though he'd said nothing, she could feel it, the unasked question pressed like stone between them. Who are you really? She remembered the moment the name was spoken in front of him. Baroness. It had sounded like a slap against the skin of this place. A foreign, cold thing. She had looked at him, wanting to explain everything at once. That she had fled her husband's hands not because of cruelty, but because of absence. That her title was a cage with golden locks. That the moment he had given her water, she was no longer that woman. But she'd said none of it. And silence, once a comfort between them, had turned into something else. That night, she wandered away from the fire, out past the sleeping children and the quiet tents, past the old tree near the river, where she often played her flute. The stars were clouded. The wind murmured through the grasses, like the whispering of stories she was not yet ready to hear. She found him by the river. Wiaka was kneeling, his hands sunk deep into the red clay at the water's edge, forming something with slow, deliberate motion. A bowl, maybe, or a small vessel. His brow was drawn, jaw tight. He did not look up. I thought you were gone, she said softly. I was thinking. She stepped closer, the hem of her dress brushing the grass. Of what? Of before. That word hung between them, ancient and weighted. My first love, he said, not lifting his eyes. She wore beads in her braids, laughed with her whole body. She died when the soldiers came to the village. I buried her with my father's pipe and my mother's shell earrings. Evelyn knelt beside him, her knees dug into the damp earth. I lost someone too, she said, but not in death, in life. I gave myself to a man who could not see me, who never asked how I slept or whether I dreamed or if I feared the dark. He turned to her then. You fear it. I used to. Now I think the dark simply asks us to listen. For the first time in days, he smiled. Not wide, not long, but real. You didn't tell me who you were, he said at last. I didn't know how. You do now. She reached into her cloak. unfolded the letter, held it out. He took it, but did not read. Instead, he asked, "What does it say?" "That I was born into a life that praised the shape of my shoulders, but never the shape of my thoughts. That I crossed an ocean not to find adventure, but to find something quiet. That when I woke up beneath that wagon, and you looked at me like I was alive, not broken, I began again." He folded the letter, tucked it into his pouch. They sat in silence then, side by side, hands still caked in red clay, breaths slowing to match the rhythm of the water. "Do you believe in starting over?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I believe in continuing." She rested her head lightly against his shoulder, and he did not move away. They did not speak of love. That would have made it smaller. It was not yet time for confessions. Only presence. Only choosing to stay. When they returned to the village, the fire was low, and Hopia waited near it. She said nothing as they entered, but Evelyn caught the softness in her gaze. The following days unfolded like slow petals. Evelyn walked without wincing. She cooked without watching Hopia's hands. She laughed once in a way that startled herself. But peace does not linger where men bring greed. A week after the trader's visit, the riders came. There were 5 of them, dust-choked and cloaked in fur, rifles strapped across their backs. They did not ride fast. They rode with the assurance of those who believe the land already belongs to them. Children scattered. Men stepped forward. Wiaka's bow was slung over his shoulder, but his eyes went first to Evelyn. They were here for her. The lead rider dismounted and pointed. "We're here for the English lady, Baroness Duval. She's worth plenty." Wiaka stepped in front of her. "She's not going," he said. The man chuckled. "Not your choice." Behind Wiaka, Evelyn stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was clear as creek water in winter. "My name is Evelyn," she said. "No Baroness lives here." The rider turned, amused. "Don't matter what name you use, girl. You belong to someone. Always did." "No," she said. "Not anymore." Tension snapped like a pulled wire. Wiaka raised his bow. Evelyn's heart pounded, not with fear, but with clarity. This was the moment. This was where she chose not just to survive, but to be. And as the fire cracked behind her, and the sun lowered its head behind the hills, she stood tall beside the man who had once carried her in silence, and who now stood ready to fight for her voice. But there was no battle yet. Only the held breath of the land. Only the decision that would come next. And still, the wind whispered, waiting to carry their choice forward. The fire was not just in the hearth that night. It lived in their blood, in the dry grass bending beneath them, in the breathless hush of the hills. It moved like something ancient, called up from the marrow of the earth, summoned not by war drums, but by choice. Wiaka stood with his bow drawn, the taut line humming softly in the wind. Evelyn stood behind him, spine straight, gaze locked on the lead rider who claimed her as something to be returned, traded, owned. She had not thought she would feel brave in such a moment. She thought she would shake, plead, break. But she only burned, slow and steady, like coals refusing to die. The lead bounty hunter smiled with a mouth that had forgotten kindness. "Easy now," he said, raising a hand as if peace was his to offer. "No one needs to get hurt. We only want the girl." "She is not yours," Wiaka said, voice low and final. "Maybe not, but she's not yours either." Wiaka didn't answer. He didn't need to. The air around him spoke louder than words, thick with the weight of what he would do, what he had already done. Evelyn knew. This man had killed before, but never for pride, never for sport. Only to protect. Only when something sacred was at stake. She stepped forward. "My name is Evelyn," she said, loud enough for the wind to carry it. "I am not a baroness. I am not a runaway. I am not someone's property." The riders stirred, uncertain. "I came across the sea to disappear," she continued, "and instead I found myself." The words landed like arrows, clean and sure. "I'm not going back." The lead rider looked at her, then at Wiaka, then at the village quietly watching from behind tents and trees. "All right," he said, and his voice shifted. "Have it your way." He raised his hand. A shot rang out. Not from his gun. From the ridge behind them. Weaka spun, arrow loosed before he'd even turned fully. The rider beside the leader dropped with a scream, clutching his leg. The children scattered. Dogs barked. Hopia shouted something sharp and fast in Lakota, ushering the youngest behind the teepees. Evelyn didn't move. She saw only Weaka, his face calm, his eyes dark, his body poised in that beautiful, terrifying stillness before the storm. "Get to the canyon," he told her, voice like gravel and thunder. She hesitated. "Now," he said. She ran. Not away, not alone, together. Weaka grabbed the reins of his horse, swung onto its back, and pulled her up behind him. Her arms clung to his waist as the wind slapped at their faces, as hooves tore across the grass, leaving behind firelight, cries, gunshots, the smell of fear. They didn't speak as they rode. There was no room for speech in that kind of flight, only breath and heartbeat in motion. The canyon rose ahead, tall cliffs splitting the land like an open jaw. Weaka guided the horse through a narrow cut, barely wide enough for the two of them. Shots echoed behind them, distant but chasing. The bounty hunters followed, fewer now, but still hungry, still close. Weaka pulled the horse to a stop in the shadow of a cliff, where an ancient tree bent sideways from stone. He dismounted and lifted Evelyn down. She gripped his arms harder than she meant to. "There's a path through the water," he said. "Hidden. They won't find it." He led her to the edge of the cliff, where the river shimmered below, dark and winding. She stared down. It looked far. Too far. "They'll catch us," she said. "They won't." "Because of the path." "No," he said. "Because we jump." Her breath caught. "You said." "I'll be with you." She looked at him, then truly looked. The lines on his face were etched by sun and sorrow, the shape of a man who had lost much but carried it gently. His eyes were not pleading. They were certain. She nodded. He held her hand. Together they ran and leapt. For a moment there was only sky, huge, infinite, swallowing them whole. Then wind. Then the cold bite of river. It was like falling into the mouth of the world. Water clutched at her ribs. Darkness swallowed her eyes. But Weaka's grip never loosened. They surfaced together, gasping, his arm around her as he kicked toward the rocks. They crawled up the far bank, coughing, soaked through. She lay there, blinking up the sky, and laughed, breathless, wild, alive. Weaka rolled to his side, watching her. "You laugh after falling," he said. "You caught me." She sat up, hair dripping, dress clinging to her skin. "Do you think they'll follow?" she asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because you stopped running." They stayed hidden for 2 days in a cave high above the water, where moss clung to stone and the air smelled like roots and rain. Weaka lit no fire. They ate dried meat and berries, slept close for warmth. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. "You changed the path," he said one evening. "Not just yours. Mine too." "I was afraid," she said. "All my life." "Not anymore." "No, not anymore." The silence between them was not empty. It was full. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. On the third morning, they returned. The village was still standing. 2 riders lay buried in the hills. The others had fled. Hopia embraced them both, her hands trembling only slightly. The children came running. The dogs howled. Evelyn stepped into the center of the camp, soaking wet, bruised, barefoot, and whole. The next day, she took down the letter to her brother and burned it, not in anger, but in release. The smoke rose soft into the sky, like a blessing. In time, a cabin was built, not of stone, but of wood and love and the steady hands of those who had once carried sorrow. It stood by the river, close enough to remember, far enough to begin again. In that house, there was music, laughter, a garden that never quite grew straight, a flute by the window, children who listened to stories told in 2 languages. Evelyn never wore lace again. Weaka never sang to the stars alone. Their love did not announce itself with grand declarations or endless kisses. It was in the way he handed her a bowl without asking if she was hungry, in the way she rested her hand on his back when he prayed. It was in the fire they built together, the one that did not consume, but warmed. They had both been broken. But broken things, when joined with care, hold the light better than before. And so, if you find yourself one day walking the edge of some far prairie, and you hear flute music floating on the breeze, and you feel the strange urge to look up and smile at the sky, perhaps that is them. Perhaps the fire still burns. If this tale found a soft place in your heart, if it stirred something quiet and kind, then let it rest there a while. Like this story, share it with someone who needs a reminder. You are never too lost to be found. Subscribe for more tales whispered from long ago. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to know where the echoes of this fire reach you.